The night the National Weather Service issued its first Category 3 hurricane warning for the city, Sophia bought a new yacht to celebrate her new lover's birthday on the Hudson, a multi-million-dollar watch from an auction, a vintage sports car shipped over from Europe, all proof of her love for that man. I called her over a dozen times, telling her to be safe, to not gamble with her life. Sophia's voice was dripping with contempt. Can't you just be happy as my husband? Haven't I given you enough? Why do you have to pick a fight with him? He's young, he likes to have fun. What's it to you? That night, the hurricane hit, capsizing the yacht. No one on board survived. The paparazzi were on me instantly, asking for my thoughts. I was silent for a long time. I said nothing. I didn't hate her anymore. She used to be so good to me. Of course, now she was even better to me. After all, she was dead, and all her money was mine. When the National Weather Service issued a tropical storm warning, I had just pulled up to the Johnston family estate. My 5-year-old son, Henry, was tossing and turning on the sofa. "Grandma, I want $100 million. My mother-in-law chuckled, turning a page of her newspaper. "All right, when our Henry grows up, you'll get $100 million. Henry didn't cry or throw a tantrum. He just said very seriously, "Grandma, I mean right now." He'd always had a calm demeanor. He was just a kid, but he loved talking about grown-up things. "Henry." I walked over and sat down next to him. "Tell Daddy, why do you want so much money right now? When you're older, Daddy can give it to you." "Because..." Henry thought for a moment, then turned on the TV and pulled up a replay. On the show, Sophia's kept man, an actor named Ethan Cole, was being interviewed. He had just walked the red carpet, a limited edition designer watch on his wrist. A swarm of paparazzi surrounded him. "Mr. Cole, can you tell us about that watch? Was it a gift from someone you love?" Ethan smiled shyly. "Yes, it was a gift from my fiancée. She loves me very much. So, are wedding bells in the near future?" "Yes." Ethan covered his mouth as he laughed. "I was just thinking about when she's going to propose to me." The camera suddenly panned to someone in the audience. It was a stunningly beautiful woman, her eyes fixed on Ethan, a faint smile on her face. That was the fiancée Ethan was talking about. If she weren't my wife, I suppose I would have thought she and Ethan made a perfect couple. Henry turned off the TV. "Grandpa, isn't that the watch you bought at auction for my 4th birthday? Cost millions. I haven't even worn it yet. Why did Mom take it and give it to someone else?" My father-in-law looked at me, embarrassed. I picked Henry up. "For your next birthday, Daddy will get you an even nicer one. Okay? But I want the one Grandpa gave me," Henry said, his eyes welling up with tears. "Grandpa, isn't the gift you gave me mine?" "Of course it's yours, Henry. Then why did Mom take it and give it to someone else? Why is that man wearing my watch?" My mother-in-law shot up from her seat, furious. How dare Sophia scheme after her own son's things? To do something like this, it's a complete disgrace. I'm calling her right now and telling her to get her ass back here. "Don't cry, my sweet boy." My mother-in-law patiently comforted Henry. "Mom, I'm in a meeting right now." Sophia's voice came through the phone. "What meeting? If you're not back by 6 o'clock tonight, don't bother coming back at all." My mother-in-law had a private playground built for Henry, and construction had just finished. To cheer him up, she took him to see it. After they left, my father-in-law sat on the sofa, fuming. I walked over. "Dad, don't worry. Henry's just a kid. He'll forget all about the watch in a few days." My father-in-law looked at me apologetically. "Brandon, what did Sophia ever do to deserve a husband like you? Why doesn't she appreciate it? And for her to do something so shameless, all over the news, don't you worry. I'll make this right for you." I kept a smile plastered on my face and spoke agreeably. My father-in-law casually turned on the TV and flipped the channel. He changed it twice, and both times it landed on an entertainment news program showing Ethan Cole being interviewed. "Mr. Cole, you were recently photographed checking into a hotel with the eldest daughter of the Johnston family. Are you her lover? Mr. Cole, you were seen taking a child to the hospital. You claimed you were helping a friend. Is that true?" My father-in-law shut the TV off in a rage. The Johnston family is a huge enterprise. We absolutely cannot have a scandal. It will affect the company's stock price. I nodded in agreement, said goodbye to my father-in-law, and went to the study. Walking up the stairs, I let the smile drop from my face. I wasn't smiling, but I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. Sophia kept acting out, thinking she could force me to file for divorce. But I would never give her what she wanted. I would just cut her out of the picture. The more she publicly flaunted her love for Ethan, the more she wanted to marry him, the more her parents would resent her. That was the day I was waiting for. Sophia came back during dinner that evening. My father-in-law told me he wanted to invite a TV station to film at the house to showcase our happy family atmosphere and dispel the rumors about our marriage falling apart. I readily agreed. In fact, it was exactly what I had been thinking. It's just that there are some things I can't suggest myself, so I had someone subtly propose the idea for me. When Sophia got back, she dragged me into the study. "Brandon Hall, what the hell did you tell my parents? Why is my mom so angry? Shouldn't you be asking yourself what you did?" I replied calmly. "Don't give me that crap." Sophia exploded. "We've been trying to get a divorce for 5 years. Why won't you just agree to it? Brandon, what's the point of dragging this out? I will never love you again. We're in the past. Why can't you just let us part on good terms? What are you talking about?" Noticing my father-in-law standing in the doorway, I controlled my tone and spoke gently. "Sophia, I never wanted to interfere with your private life. As for the divorce, I just feel there are too many business interests tied up between us. Besides, Mom and Dad would never want us to get a divorce." "Shut up." My words only made Sophia angrier. "You always use my parents against me. Is that all you know how to do? You're the one who should shut up." My father-in-law came in and let loose a torrent of abuse at Sophia. I quietly stepped aside, smiling to myself. Forcing me to be the one to ask for a divorce? Absolutely not happening. I was going to hold on to every single one of my assets. Sophia and her father started arguing in the study. I took Henry out for a walk in the courtyard. As we walked, I received another provocative message from Ethan. I opened it. It was a photo of a little boy. Below it, a short caption, "Our future." Then, a stream of new messages followed. "Give it up. You'll be 40 in a couple of years. How much longer do you think you can last? You're clinging to the title of Mr. Johnston now. But what about later? When Sophia's parents are gone, you think you can still be so arrogant. I'll be the man of the Johnston house sooner or later. This is my son with my ex-girlfriend. But Sophia said she'll raise him as her own." I turned off my phone, paying the messages no mind. I never wanted my wife's affection or the title of Mr. Johnston. Only an idiot like Ethan would think I was fighting him over a woman. To prepare for the interview, my father-in-law had the staff redecorate the house. The TV crew arrived soon after, a whole team. Makeup artists, camera operators, prop masters, everyone was there. A few of them were sharp. As soon as they came in, they complimented my father-in-law on how distinguished he looked and how magnificent the Johnston family's decor was. My father-in-law had built his fortune from the ground up, so he had a bit of a vain streak and loved being flattered. This was exactly the effect I wanted. First, put him on a pedestal. Let everyone praise him so that later, out of concern for his image and reputation, he wouldn't dare do something like bring an illegitimate child into the family. "Mr. Johnston, how would you describe the atmosphere in your home?" My father-in-law sat in a carved rosewood chair, smiling. He had received the interview questions 2 weeks prior. He had prepared a script, so he spoke with perfect clarity. "The atmosphere at home is wonderful. My wife and I are very much in love. We've been married for decades and have rarely had a cross word. My daughter and son-in-law also have a great relationship. They have 3 children. My 2 granddaughters are twins. They went abroad for college at 16 and just turned 18. They've already taken funds from the family foundation to start their own businesses. They're incredibly bright." The host nodded, then asked the question I'd been waiting for. "And what are your thoughts, Mr. Johnston, on the recent rumors circulating about Ms. Johnston and the actor Ethan Cole?" "Those are all false," my father-in-law said with conviction, clearing the air. "My daughter is a very busy woman. She simply doesn't have time to be carrying on with a lover. It's all nonsense. And most importantly, she is a woman of impeccable character. I almost burst out laughing. Luckily, I was sitting far enough away that no one noticed. I opened my phone to a new notification. Ethan had posted a new selfie. In one photo, two hands were clasped tightly together. Ethan had added a caption, "Out with my love. She loves me the most." Someone commented below, "Is that Ms. Johnston?" Ethan neither confirmed nor denied it, simply replying with a guess who emoji. "Mr. Johnston, as a mother, in what ways would you say Sophia has been successful?" The host continued, "My father-in-law's face was a mask of composure. Sophia is like a friend to her 3 children. They have immense respect for her. To them, their mother is a role model." My phone lit up. Both my older daughters had messaged me. "Tiffany, Dad, what is going on with Mom? Why are there so many trashy rumors? I'm even seeing them on international news sites. Melanie, Dad, has Mom lost her mind? Isn't that watch on Ethan Cole's wrist the one Grandpa gave Henry? Mom is stealing from a 5-year-old now. Wow, it sounds like the children have a very deep bond with their mother." The host exclaimed, "Mr. Johnston, what you've said today has shown us a completely different side of Ms. Johnston. I'd also like to know, how often do the children connect with their mother?" Tiffany and Melanie call their mother every week to discuss all sorts of things. "They are very devoted," my father-in-law continued. I replied to my daughters and added a question. "How often do you talk to your mom?" A few seconds later, I got my replies. Tiffany, "Never." Melanie, "I called once. She didn't answer or call back, so I never tried again." As for Henry, he's younger, but he's also very sensible. He and his mother are very close. My father-in-law turned his gaze to Henry, who was playing with a puzzle in the living room, and continued to ramble on. Sitting next to Henry was Chloe, my father-in-law's niece, who was a few months younger. Hearing his name, Henry stood up and waved. "Grandpa, did you call me?" A cameraman immediately pointed the lens at Henry. Filming him was fine, of course, but whether it would make the final cut, I had no idea. My in-laws would probably object to Henry being on camera at such a young age. He had been kidnapped as a toddler, and the culprits had nearly killed him. "Little boy, is your mommy your favorite person in the family?" Huh? Henry looked up at the host, completely unafraid, and shook his head. "I like Daddy, Grandpa, Grandma, and my sisters the most. What about Mommy?" Before Henry could answer, Chloe jumped up, a look of shock on her face. "Henry, you have a mommy?" Henry turned to her. I've never seen your mommy before. I thought your mom was dead." 2 of the cameramen were trying so hard not to laugh their faces turned red. The lighting technician just burst out laughing. The host was a true professional. Her expression didn't change, but her tightly pressed lips betrayed her. Seeing my father-in-law's awkward expression, she quickly spoke. "Mr. Johnston, please don't worry, we'll cut this part out. We'll send you the edited version for approval as soon as it's ready." My father-in-law smiled graciously. No, it's fine. I trust you." Then he explained to the crew, "That's my sister's daughter. She doesn't come to the estate often, so she rarely sees Sophia. But it's true Sophia isn't home much. She values family, but as you know, her work is extremely demanding, so it can be difficult for her to balance everything." The host nodded repeatedly. "Yes, of course, we understand completely." When the interview aired, the online mockery of the Johnston family and Sophia reached a new peak. More and more people started putting together a timeline. The day Sophia's father was praising his family-oriented daughter in an interview, she was shacked up with a celebrity. The day her son was born, her father posted on X about the joy of having a grandson. That same day, Ethan Cole posted a picture of a mysterious woman's back with the caption, "Everyone in life needs a friend who will drop everything for you." And for years, Sophia was consistently absent from family photos. She rarely attended family dinners but never missed one of Ethan's award ceremonies. Even on the day her daughters returned home for their 18th birthday party, Sophia arrived at the last minute. The reason? Ethan had sent a message saying he was hurt, and Sophia had stayed by his side. One example after another, all these comparisons were dug up by netizens. My father-in-law thought the interview would redeem the family name and restore his daughter's reputation. He never imagined that if his words were too far removed from Sophia's actual behavior, it would have the opposite effect. After returning from outside, my father-in-law sat on the sofa, staring at his phone. "Dad," I walked over. "Don't worry, I've seen everything online. I'll help Sophia take care of it." My father-in-law's face lit up. "Brandon, that's a relief. You always see the big picture." "Dad, someone will be here soon to drop something off. It's from Tiffany and Melanie. They had it brought over, just cleared customs. They're always worried about your poor circulation, so they sourced a lot of rare herbal remedies for you." At the mention of his granddaughters, my father-in-law's mood instantly improved. Those two juggling their studies and their new businesses, so busy, and they still go out of their way to find these things. They work so hard. All my old aches and pains, Sophia has never even bothered to ask about them. Raising her was a waste. The younger generation is so much better. As he spoke, my father-in-law brought the topic back around. "These comments are infuriating. When you have a moment, have someone delete them all." I took the phone he handed me. It was the comment section of a video clip. LMAO, they really think the internet is stupid. I can't believe Mr. Johnston had the nerve to say all that. This is all so dramatic. Everyone knows Sophia plays around. For her dad to praise her like that, is he completely blind? Mr. Johnston can say it, but I can't bring myself to listen. You're all laughing and having fun, but I don't actually find this funny. I've been online for a long time, so I'm one of the older netizens, and I know a lot about Ms. Johnston and her husband's past. All I can say is, seeing these reports makes me believe in love even less. Same here. When they were young, they defended each other in public, a true power couple in the business world. They went through so much together, and now it's come to this. 20 years ago, everyone thought he was after her money and she was after his looks, but they stayed together for years, facing everything side by side. Eventually, everyone believed they were the real deal, and all the speculation and prejudice disappeared. And now this comes out. That Ethan Cole is just unbearable. With that plastic, surgically enhanced face, I honestly don't know how he survives in the film industry. Ha ha ha, now that you mention it, I remember a few years ago he won some reality TV competition, and everyone mocked him, saying he paid for his title. I suspected that too. I even suspected Sophia funded the production teams for all his shows. Otherwise, with his cringe-worthy acting, I really can't figure out why he gets so many roles. I handed the phone back to my father-in-law. "Dad, no matter what they say about you online, don't take it to heart. I'll have someone deal with the online chatter as soon as possible." My father-in-law agreed enthusiastically and handed over another major project from the Johnston Corporation to me. For the past few years, my mother-in-law's health had been declining, and she had begun to relinquish control. And ever since Sophia met Ethan, she hadn't given a single thought to the company or her work. She never had much of a knack for business to begin with, and once she stopped caring, her performance was abysmal. So, for years, I had been managing many of the company's projects and operations. Over the past 5 years, I had taken firm control of many things. All the patience and silence had paid off. For these 5 years, from start to finish, my only thought has been how to best secure the interests of myself and my children. So-called love is far too unreliable. I stopped caring about such empty, intangible things long ago. I took a deep breath and sent a message to the person who would be delivering the package to the house shortly. Just drop off the items. No need for much conversation. The children hadn't bought them, I had arranged everything. The reason I credited my 2 children was, naturally, to pave the way for them. A notorious socialite, hopelessly infatuated with a man, and 2 brilliant, gifted heiresses. Between the 2, I think my in-laws knew exactly what the right choice was. If they didn't want the family fortune, built over generations, to be squandered by their own daughter, they would have to think carefully. As for Henry, he is no weak prince. He will be a king with absolute authority over his own life. He is smart, brave, proud, and has a strong sense of self-worth and a competitive spirit. Living in a family like this, these are not bad qualities to have. I will encourage him to fight for everything he wants. And I will do my best to pave the way for him. The idea of being deprived of love is, more often than not, a fallacy. What he needs are resources, power, respect, and equality. After the media storm erupted, Sophia called me for the first time in ages. This time, her attitude was much better. I only realized after seeing all the summaries online how many moments I've missed with my family. The day my dad did that interview, I didn't know Ethan had posted our pictures online with those misleading captions. I'll talk to him. Is there anything else? I said, speaking to her civilly for once. Sophia paused for a moment. Yes, go on. My mom called and said I have to come home and face the consequences. My dad is furious too. Said he'll deal with me sooner or later. So, Brandon, could you put in a good word for me when you're there? All right, I agreed. Don't worry. This is about the Johnston family's reputation and our honor as a couple. I know what's at stake. If it's hard to clear up, I can hold a press conference for you. If I clarify things in my name, people will be more likely to believe it. This time, Sophia was silent for a very, very long time. When she spoke again, she even stammered. Sophia said my name. Brandon, thank you. It had been nearly 5 years since she had spoken my name so calmly. For these 5 years, we had despised the sight of each other. Before hanging up, Sophia added one more thing. Brandon, all these years, I'm the one who's wronged you. I hung up the phone and took a deep breath. Now you know how to say you're sorry? What were you doing before? I couldn't help but let out a cold laugh. I anonymously sent the files my private investigator had gathered on Sophia to several major tabloids and well-known paparazzi. The Johnston family had been in the city for generations, powerful, influential, with a high standing. Now that they were at the center of a storm, the reporters and paparazzi would tread carefully, hesitant to expose Sophia's scandals. But for me, that was no big deal. If no one dared to report it, I would resort to paid news. Or I could simply acquire a few smaller tabloids, run the story, and then dissolve them. There are so many things in this world that money can solve. I stared at a photo on the wall for a long time. It was taken over 20 years ago, when Sophia and I first met. Back then, our love for each other was so fierce that we could see nothing else. The year we met, my family's business was a rising star, while the Johnston family was on the brink of bankruptcy after a failed corporate restructuring. Against the objections of many of my relatives, I married Sophia. For years, I not only managed my own family's business but also took over part of the Johnston Corporation's operations. 3 years later, the Johnston family successfully recovered and began to thrive. The Johnston family grew to respect me more and more, but the noise from the outside world grew louder. Outsiders only saw the Johnston family reclaiming its place among the city's elite. They didn't see how I had stood by Sophia without hesitation during their most difficult times. Everyone thought I was after power and beauty, never considering that when I insisted on being with Sophia, she had nothing left. Over time, these fabrications and malicious speculations about me faded, and Sophia and I weathered more than a decade of storms together. The night before our son was born, I received a video. It was from Ethan Cole, Sophia's lover. The content was predictable. Bedroom photos, intimate pictures, all with a provocative edge. At that time, my father had been dead for several years, and my older brother had just died in a plane crash, his body never found. I don't know how I made it through that period. My mother lost her mind after my brother's accident, smashing things, screaming at everyone she saw. Our family business was left unattended, and the cash flow almost dried up. Sophia was resolute. She wanted a divorce to marry Ethan. After more than a decade together, I thought that even if little love was left, there would at least be the bond of family. But Sophia showed no regard for our history, single-mindedly pushing for a divorce. Her parents were even more resolute. They absolutely refused to let Sophia divorce me. They offered me financial compensation to forgive Sophia's transgressions and promised to invest in my family's company. At that time, holding my newborn son, I thought and thought, ran through countless scenarios, and carefully considered the future. The choice was simple: divorce or not. Not divorcing meant angering Sophia. Divorcing meant angering her parents. My daughters were only 13 at the time. There was no way I could win a custody battle against the Johnston family. Even if my father and brother were still alive, my family's company was no match for the Johnstons. I had no way to fight them. Whether it was my 13-year-old twin daughters or my newborn son, I couldn't take a single one of them with me. And if I chose divorce, Sophia would marry Ethan immediately. Given Ethan's personality and his constant provocations, he would never treat my children well. Once Sophia and Ethan had children of their own, my children's situation would become even worse. At the same time, if I was cast out by the Johnston family, doing business would become much harder. But with the Johnston family as my backer, I could easily secure many things for myself. So I chose not to divorce. Staying with the Johnston family, I wouldn't be mistreated. I could pursue whatever I wanted. The only downside was Sophia's loathing. But I was long past the age where I needed love, so I quickly accepted her change of heart. As for her cold stares and disgust, what did that have to do with me? Her hating me was her problem. As for me, I only cared about what I wanted. In any trade-off, there are gains and losses. But if all it took was a little patience to get so much more of what I wanted, then I was willing to accept the loss. Sophia was out of the house 25 days a month, and even when she was home, we never crossed paths. I was perfectly happy with that arrangement. She thought her prolonged cold shoulder would cause me pain. But she was wrong. I didn't care. Lost in thought, I snapped a pen in two. Helping Sophia with her PR nightmare was, of course, just something I said for show. I couldn't wait to see the scandal blow up even bigger. An idiot like Sophia needed to be out of the picture, and soon. For the next 3 days, I stayed at my own company, buried in work. My father-in-law called me every day, asking how the damage control for Sophia's scandal was going. I was always respectful, my words sincere, each time telling him, it's almost taken care of. But that was it. I had no intention of dealing with the news. It was all talk with no plan for actual action. The last time he called, I composed myself before answering. Dad, everything could have been resolved smoothly, but that Ethan guy is still trying to piggyback off Sophia's fame. Just now, he posted more misleading things on social media. He even posted something like bedroom photos. My father-in-law was furious and ordered me to bring Sophia home immediately. I smiled. Okay, Dad. The driver pulled up, and Sophia and I got out of the car. I looked at Sophia, her face a mask of irritation as she hesitated by the door, and moved closer to her. Don't worry. Let's just go inside. Whatever it is, we can sort it out later. Sophia's brow relaxed slightly. You're the only good one, Brandon. I almost scoffed. Let's go. I walked in first. Faced with her father's questioning, Sophia's mood soured even more. How should I know why Ethan posted those pictures? He may have no shame, but I do. Dad, I interjected at the right moment. This was probably something Ethan did on his own. Sophia wouldn't be so reckless. Things like this get a lot of attention at first, but once the hype dies down, people will stop caring. We should just let it cool off. My father-in-law thought for a moment and finally agreed. My mother-in-law's 80th birthday was the perfect opportunity to make a big move. To restore the company's reputation, I followed her instructions and donated to various charities and provided equipment to several research universities. Suddenly, her reputation really did improve, and even the criticism of Sophia died down. Since the party was meant to clear the air, reporters were invited in advance, and the entire event was live-streamed. In the middle of the party, just as my mother-in-law was delivering a passionate speech about her glorious life, someone burst in. It was Ethan Cole. Almost everyone in the room turned at the same time, staring at this person who had barged in like an intruder. Recognizing who it was, some of the younger guests, confident in their own family's status, started whispering among themselves. Ethan stood there in a daze, looking helplessly at Sophia. He wasn't an idiot. Seeing so many people staring at him, he knew he had screwed up. Sophia, her face livid, grabbed Ethan and dragged him out. My mother-in-law's expression was grim. She watched them leave, her face filled with rage. I stood to the side, my face blank. Everyone was stunned by Ethan's arrival. But I wasn't surprised at all. I was the one who had him invited in Sophia's name. The reason given was that Sophia wanted to introduce him to her family on this important occasion, a way of promising him a future. Pulling something like this off required some technical skill. I hired the best hacker who could easily do many things for me. Even the intimate photos previously posted on Ethan's social media were my doing. Ethan had benefited immensely from his association with Sophia over the years. He knew himself that, with his status, he would never be accepted into the Johnston family. But when a message like that suddenly appeared on his phone, he was so overwhelmed with joy that he didn't even stop to consider whether the call from Sophia's assistant was real or fake. So he dressed to the nines and arrived at the party, elated. Even the fact that he was able to get past the heavy security was because I had deliberately authorized the guards to let him, and only him, through. As the professional MC stepped in to save the situation, I slipped out through a back door. Sophia and Ethan were arguing in the back garden. "What the hell do you think you're doing? On a day as important as this, why did you have to come and cause trouble? Are you trying to completely humiliate my family?" Ethan kept shaking his head. "No, you've got it all wrong, Sophia. I was just as shocked when I saw those videos and pictures on my account. I swear I didn't post them." "Ha!" Sophia let out a cold laugh. "Do you take me for an idiot? You think I'd believe that? Are you going to say your account was hacked and some hacker posted all that?" "Yes, that's exactly it," Ethan cried out. "Sophia, my account was really hacked. I would never post something like that. Stop lying to me." Sophia shoved Ethan away hard. "You clearly wanted to use those photos and videos to announce our relationship to the world, to use public pressure to force me to marry you sooner. If I couldn't see through a scheme like that, how could I survive in the business world? Please don't do this to me," Ethan sobbed. Then he leaned in to kiss Sophia. Sophia froze, pushing him away only after a couple of seconds. I turned and walked away from my hiding spot, a smile on my face. Such a juicy scene, all of it would be caught on camera. A few days earlier, to better showcase the Johnston family's mansion and its massive hilltop garden, I had suggested to my father-in-law that we allow more camera crews and reporters onto the property. While some reporters were live streaming from the party, others could be arranged to film the mansion. My proposal was exactly what my father-in-law wanted. He had always loved to subtly show off his wealth. This time, while restoring the Johnston family's reputation, he could also display his family's immense fortune. It perfectly satisfied his need to flaunt. So he readily agreed to my suggestion. I knew Ethan would come, and I guessed Sophia would drag him outside to angrily confront him. As for where she would take him, I wasn't sure, so I simply stationed dedicated cameramen at every spot near the main hall to live stream. On the surface, they were filming the scenery and providing commentary. In reality, they were there to accidentally record everything Sophia and Ethan said. By the time the party ended, hashtags about Sophia and Ethan were already trending. Unlike Ethan's previous subtle hints on social media, the live stream provided both video and hard evidence. So, no matter how the Johnston family tried to suppress the story or issue clarifications later, they couldn't change the fact that Sophia was having an affair. Sophia would be forever nailed to a pillar of shame. The Johnston family would be disgraced by her existence. My mother-in-law was so upset she was rushed to the hospital. Her personal secretary hurried over from the office. I knew he was carrying very important documents. This was about the will. There was no room for error. My mother-in-law was lying in her hospital room. Her secretary went in, my father-in-law went in, but I wasn't allowed. Even though I had been part of this family for 20 years. In many situations, I was subtly excluded, because my last name wasn't Johnston. But it didn't matter. I gave a self-deprecating smile and straightened Henry's clothes and pockets. "Henry, Grandma is sick, and she's very angry right now. Can you go in and cheer her up? You need to help her get better soon. Understand?" Henry was eventually allowed into the room. I sat outside, calmly waiting and checking flights on my phone. I hadn't anticipated my mother-in-law being hospitalized over this, so I hadn't arranged for my daughters to come back in advance. Fortunately, as soon as the emergency happened, I had my secretary contact them. In the afternoon, my mother-in-law's condition stabilized. When she learned her two granddaughters were rushing back because she was in the hospital, She was very moved and praised them for a long time. She had always had high hopes for them. Her regard for them was genuine. Although Sophia had become increasingly reckless over the past 5 years, she was still her biological daughter. So no matter what happened, her parents would likely never give up on her. The Johnston family fortune would eventually pass to my children, but it would most likely go to Sophia first, and then to them a generation later. For years, I had been on guard, making sure Sophia didn't have any children out of wedlock. Fate had been kind to me in that regard. As I had hoped, Sophia and Ethan never had a child. But that didn't mean my children's positions as heirs were secure. Once my in-laws were gone, there would be no one left to restrain Sophia. She could produce an illegitimate child at any time. If that happened and she favored her outside child, it was hard to say who would inherit everything. So my goal was to destroy all of my mother-in-law's trust in Sophia. Once she decided to bypass her disappointing daughter and hand the Johnston Corporation over to her grandchildren, my objective would be achieved. If I could achieve that, then my 5 years of patience and careful planning would have been worth it. I would not give up the assets my children and I deserved, nor would I voluntarily exit the marriage and let Ethan reap all the benefits. During the 5 years of their affair, Ethan had continuously spread rumors to defame me. He even hired people to kidnap my son to threaten me into divorcing Sophia. And the only reason he was so bold was because Sophia was backing him. I have always been one to hold a grudge. Everything Ethan and Sophia had done, one thing after another, had filled me with a deep-seated hatred. Cross me, hurt the people I care about, and you will pay the price. No matter who you are, I will not let you go. After Henry came out of the hospital room, I discreetly removed a tiny listening device from a hidden pocket in his clothes. When I heard my mother-in-law had decided to change her will, bypassing Sophia and leaving the Johnston Corporation to her grandchildren, I let out a long sigh of relief. I had achieved everything I set out to do. 5 years. It was worth it. My father-in-law had been reluctant at first, hoping Sophia would show up at the hospital and explain why she was still kissing Ethan. But Sophia never came. So my father-in-law relented and agreed. He could see that his daughter was not cut out for business. He had watched his daughter grow up, and he had watched his grandchildren grow up too. But one was a rotten socialite, and the others were rising sons, thriving saplings. He knew in his heart which choice was better for the family. After the will was changed, my father-in-law asked his wife one more question. What about our daughter? If everything is left to the grandchildren, Brandon is their father. What if he takes control of the company? And, if Sophia has nothing, what if Brandon decides to get revenge on her for her past betrayals? Hearing this, for a split second, I couldn't help but feel it was all so unfair. Although I had long known they both had an exclusionary mindset, hearing it out loud still felt a little cold. For all these years, I had given more to the Johnston family than anyone. But while they were happy to accept my contributions, when it came time to reap the rewards, they, the self-proclaimed Johnstons, suddenly felt I didn't deserve anything. My mother-in-law dismissed her husband's concerns. You don't need to worry. We watched those 2 girls grow up. Don't we know how devoted they are to us? They will keep a firm grip on the company. As for Sophia, you have even less to worry about. We're just not giving her the company. That doesn't mean she'll be a pauper. Sophia can draw money from the family foundation every month. I'll give her other properties and funds. How could she ever be controlled? How could she ever be short on money? Besides, don't even mention her. My head starts to ache just thinking about her. She's not worth all our planning. After such a huge scandal, after so much shame brought upon the Johnston family, she can still be all lovey-dovey with that man and hasn't even shown up at the hospital to see me. She has absolutely no shame. If the Johnston Corporation really fell into her hands, that would be the end of it. I turned off the recording and destroyed the tiny listening device. My mother-in-law thought her grandchildren would obey them completely, but how could she know? The children I raised myself wouldn't side with their own father? When I got home that night, Sophia was in her room, looking for something. She saw me and quickly stood up. Is Mom okay? Sophia was oblivious to everything I had done, her tone exceptionally polite. She's fine, I said, putting my bag on the sofa. But she's quite angry with you, so you should probably stay away from the hospital for a while. You don't want to see her and make her even more upset. My earnest advice made Sophia's attitude even more deferential. Okay, I'll listen to you. You really are the best, Brandon. That Ethan, he's just not worth it. After complaining to me about Ethan, she told me what had happened that day. I was on my way to the hospital to see Mom, but I ran into this unreasonable driver who hit my car and then refused to admit it, claiming I reversed into him. That's why I was late getting to the hospital. The maid made some soup. You should go downstairs and eat, I said, cutting her off. I wasn't concerned about her, I just wanted her to stop talking. I already knew everything she was telling me, because I had arranged it. My goal was to prevent her from getting to the hospital. She had to bear the reputation of being an unfilial daughter. Otherwise, how could the will have been changed so smoothly? My words moved Sophia even more. You're the only one who cares about my well-being. I'll go eat in a bit. She suddenly grabbed my hand and placed an exquisite box in it. Brandon, after everything that's happened, I see now that you're the one who's truly meant for me, and you're the only one who truly loves me. As for Ethan, I've decided to break up with him. As she spoke, Sophia tried to put a watch on my wrist. Before, I was angry you wouldn't divorce me, so I threw away our wedding rings. Now I've bought a new pair of watches. Let's start over, okay? From now on, let's live a good life together. I fought back a wave of nausea and pulled my hand away. That's not necessary. The rings are gone. I don't think we need to replace them. We're not young anymore, we don't need these empty gestures. Besides, I didn't want to accept anything from Sophia, especially not something like a watch that symbolizes time. It would only make me feel more disgusted. Sophia was stunned for a moment. Brandon, deep down, are you still angry with me? Sophia didn't leave until late into the night. She even tried to kiss me to be intimate. Couldn't hold back. I shoved her away forcefully. She hadn't set foot in this room for 5 years. For 5 years, she had spent her days and nights with Ethan, and we had never shared a bed. Her touch had long since become disgusting to me. Why was it that when I loved her, she could cheat whenever she wanted? And now that I utterly despised her, she could come back with a look of apology and say we should live a good life together? It was impossible. My shove angered Sophia. She looked at me in disbelief. What is the meaning of this, Brandon Hall? Before I could speak, she continued her interrogation. You think I'm dirty, don't you? That's why you don't want me to touch you? Yes. Sophia had no standing left with her mother now, so I didn't have to put up with her anymore. Ha! Sophia reached for my arm, and I pushed her away again. This time her head hit the wall. Sophia clutched her head and looked at me, laughing coldly. Fine, just fine. You think I'm dirty, right? Because I was with Ethan for a few years? Go on, you're so high and mighty, the purest man in the world. Well, I'm done trying. You don't like Ethan, do you? Then I'll go find him right now, just to spite you. Sophia stormed out, muttering curses, smashing a vase at my feet and slamming the door with a deafening crash. For the next few days, Sophia was outrageously flamboyant, as if putting on a show for me, indulging in a life of hedonistic excess. The night the National Weather Service issued its first Category 3 hurricane warning for the city, Sophia bought a new yacht to celebrate Ethan's birthday on the Hudson. Jewelry worth millions from an auction. A vintage sports car shipped over from Europe. All proof of her love for Ethan. My mother-in-law's condition, which had stabilized, took a turn for the worse, and she was rushed back to the emergency room. My father-in-law was frantic at the hospital, crying and shouting at me to call Sophia and tell her to come back immediately. I couldn't show my true feelings in front of him, so I dialed Sophia's number. I had barely said a few words before Sophia's mocking voice came through. What, you finally decided to call me? Are you jealous of Ethan again? Her tone became even more contemptuous. Can't you just be happy as my husband? Haven't I given you enough? Why do you have to pick a fight with him? He's young, he likes to have fun. What's it to you? She paused for a moment, then asked coldly. Does it make you jealous that I'm so good to another man? If you beg me, I'll come back. Sophia had always been like that. If anyone crossed her, she would find 1,000 ways to be passive-aggressive. My father-in-law snatched the phone from my hand. Sophia, how could we have a child like you in this family? You have utterly disgraced us. Don't you ever come back. I'm ashamed to have a daughter like you. With that, he threw my phone on the ground. He was clearly beyond furious. When I went to pick it up, the screen wouldn't turn on. I sighed. My poor, innocent phone. When my daughters returned, they stayed at the hospital around the clock. I took Henry home. Daddy, aren't we staying at the hospital today? No. Patted his head. We just need to get a good night's sleep. We don't need to worry about anything else. I slept soundly until morning. When I woke up, my secretary had already delivered a new phone to the estate. I turned it on, my eyes blurred by the flood of news alerts. Last night, the hurricane had hit, capsizing Sophia's new yacht. No one on board survived. After confirming the news, I was so overcome with emotion I couldn't speak. I rushed to the hospital only to receive news of another death. Just this morning, my mother-in-law had passed away peacefully in her sleep. Everything was finally settled. The will could not be changed. Sophia, who could have been a constant source of trouble, was dead. As for my father-in-law, he was no threat. After 5 years of biding my time, I had secured everything the Johnston family had for myself and my children. When my best friend, Alex, sent a congratulatory message inviting me out to celebrate, I just smiled. Some other time. It was a weekday. Work was more important. My mother-in-law's will was set in stone. My 2 daughters had inherited a great deal, but Henry had received far less than them. That was her will, and I had no right to question or change it. But I would not let that stand. I have my own company, my own career, and I control key departments within the Johnston Corporation. I have already paved the way for my daughters. Now it's time to pave the way for Henry. I will accumulate new wealth, acquire more capital, and make up for the imbalance in my mother-in-law's inheritance, giving Henry everything he missed out on. They are all my children. They should have the same starting point and the same smooth path. I love all my children equally, regardless of gender. I pulled my car out of the garage and drove past the family garden. The royal poinciana trees were in full bloom, their large, fiery red blossoms releasing their final burst of color, captivating the heart. The flowers will continue to bloom along my path, and so will my future.